Bulgarian researcher Sylvie Ivanova states, when Chief Joseph surrendered to the European forces in 1877, he gave a special gift to the European general. It turned out to be a Sumerian tablet, claiming it was a tablet which was passed down in his family for many generations, stating it was an artifact from the tribe's white ancestors many generations before. This scientific publication clearly shows that scholars are still scratching their heads as to how the tablet from another continent, dated 2042 BC, comes to be in the hands of Chief Joseph. Sylvie believes that the same scholars can't even figure out hundreds of artifacts, including other tablets, which have come to America by the way of the Mesopotamians. She states, if you open the school books at the pages of the ancient history of America, we will read all about primitive tribes, hunting buffaloes, tilling the land in primitive ways, and all this was going on in total isolation from the rest of the world. Furthermore, she states, we were being assured they were so simple they didn't even know the wheel. Yet there are artifacts which do show they had knowledge of it. This interesting artifact is displayed in the La Paz, Bolivia. It seems to display two types of languages. One is some type similar to Sumerian, and the other is yet undecipherable pictograph writing. Just to remind you, according to mainstream popular history of this area, there was no writing in this region except for the Quipo style. This is the Quipo writing with knots and ropes, and the nearest writing systems to this, according to mainstream history, would be the Mayan, Olmec, Aztec, and so on, according to Sylvie. This is interesting, she states, since other types of writing styles found on artifacts within the Americas fall into hundreds if not thousands of examples. This figurine is part of the Las Paz Museum exhibition and displays signs on the side which could also be interpreted as a form of writing. In the Tayos cave in Ecuador, Sylvie claims, numerous tablets were found with unknown writings along with other artifacts, showing clear connections with South America and ancient Europe and Asian cultures. Various gold tablets were also among the artifacts found. These artifacts clearly don't belong to any of the cultures listed in school books found in America. The Tayos cave findings aren't an isolated case. For instance, the priest, Father Crispy, collected thousands of amazing artifacts from locals. And as often with these types of finds, a fire destroyed nearly all of the artifacts. Sylvie claims he was a good man and gained the trust of the local people due in part to his good deeds toward them. Locals began giving him artifacts, and many of these, she claims, showed clear connections with the so-called Old World. This, she states, should come as no shock, as the tribes were well aware of these connections with their brothers on the other side of the ocean, and recorded an arrival, for example, on Aslan. This Aslan, she speculates, may well be Atlantis, because even the Mayan in their codex mention that the people of Aslan suffered a terrible disaster and fled from their land. According to the Maya, these people gave them culture, and according to their beliefs, this led to them building many of their wonderful cities. Ancient Mayan history has recorded where they claim some of their white brothers came from a place on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. In Popol Vuh, there are many other descriptions that support this belief, but also describe people coming across the Atlantic Ocean, but that also regular visits were maintained. Tribes in Guatemala say that even in the most adverse conditions, they will never forget their white brothers who came across the ocean from the east and built wonderful cities, she claims. Over time, she continues, many artifacts began to appear. Hundreds of them, for instance, surfaced in the state of Michigan. Other artifacts found by Russell Burroughs from Illinois about 2 decades ago are denied serious scientific study because they don't fit into the history which is being preached in school. A smear campaign was launched with the help of mass media claiming they were fake. Of course they could be, she claims. Just like any of the artifacts in a museum can be fake. But the legitimacy of the Michigan tablets, she claims, is hard to dispute, because they were found by different groups of people who documented their findings in the most reliable fashion in that time, namely by taking 10 men of good character from a village being built nearby, and were taken to the location of the find and observed the mound being opened and the artifacts being removed. After that they would sign their names as witnesses, and that these artifacts were not a forgery, and that they were indeed taken from the earth. This interesting scene, taken from one of the Michigan tablets, depicts a history lesson from an ancient school, and Sylvie suggests that she is sure the children of that time were better informed of events than they are of today. Moreover, she continues, the Michigan findings that were found with thousands of countless other artifacts showing connections from the ancient Maya and Europe. So in this case, forgery is almost impossible considering the number of artifacts found, she suggests. These precious findings from Michigan were exhibited for some time as a hoax, Sylvie suggests. But it was the only way she could see that they would have been shown to the public. She was amused by the text used with the findings, which ask for anyone still finding these artifacts in the land to tell the museum. So on one hand, the museum tries to convince the public they were a hoax, whilst on the other, they are asking if you know of others and to tell them. As you can see, she says, they are typical Egyptian artifacts. Several hundred ancient urns were found in the waters surrounding Rio de Janeiro. This was found in West Virginia, and is the same writing as seen in Ecuador and in Illinois and many other places. So these are not isolated artifacts. This item is from El Salvador. If you feel you need to see real pyramids to accept the Egyptian presence in South America, here they are, she states. And as we covered earlier, parallels in building styles with ancient America and Egypt are too many to accept without common connection. Even minor details of the inward slanting walls are the same in both cultures, on both sides of the ocean. Not to speak of the polygonal wall designs, that is an extremely complicated style of building, which we find very difficult today. How comes both cultures on either side of the ocean are using the same styles, she asks, yet the mainstream archaeologists state they had nothing to do with each other? The Mayan arches bear remarkable resemblance to those of Zikkurat of Ur in Iraq. Look at the tool marks left on the rock quarries in South America. They are very similar to those seen in Egypt. Yet another artifact with Sumerian-like writings this time was found in West Virginia, inside a burial mound. In the collection of artifacts found in Michigan, mentioned earlier, there had been a large amount of Hebrew writing on them. They are not the only ones found in America. Here are some found in Ohio. Another from Ohio is this time a Minoan pendant. All these artifacts, she states, are of the actual artifacts found in the Americas, and not like on the TV, she continues, where alleged experts might have been using false excuses and artifacts from other places from around the world to form a different time period than the one that they are actually talking about, or they can even resort to photoshopped images or digital simulations, which in itself is harmless if they only made it clear to the viewers that the most of it is fake and highly speculative, she states. She claims lots of the images aired on the History Channel would rather be fitting within a Cartoon Network instead. The interesting artifact, which seems to display Sumerian writings and a depiction of a woman similar to the Lady of Ilshan. On the right you can see the artifact found in Utah, found in the United States, and on the left is the famous Spanish figure. The history displayed in museums matches those of our history books, Sylvie suggests. However, we are not allowed inside the museum vaults. We have no idea what is in there. She speculates in the private collections the restrictions of things that fit our timeline and things that don't have no borders. And this is what we find in the private collections, such as kangaroos in South America. According to mainstream science, this mammal went extinct some 7 to 8 million years ago. So how on earth did the natives of South America meet the kangaroos? To avoid these questions, the artifacts are simply ignored, Sylvie states. No one disputes the artifacts. In fact, those items placed next to them on the shelf within the burial of the Tuinca culture, photos of other items are comfortable for them to be included in schoolbooks and scientific papers. But the others, like the kangaroos, don't exist. This image of a carved house, also found in the Tuinca burial site, resembles a building not found in that area. Instead, it's more like a representation of a typical house of those used by tribes on the Pacific coast. This is another group of artifacts from South America that depicts houses and buildings more suited in Europe and Asia, she states. These are not native in the sense which we have been led to believe they have been. For example, according to this historic manuscript, an entire city with European writing and building styles was found in Brazil a few centuries ago. If we are talking about an entire city, this is not one or two people, but hundreds if this manuscript tells the truth. Maybe our entire concept of what native is could be wrong, Sylvie suggests. This stela, located at Chivin in Peru, may not look like much at first, but it was examined by specialists who worked with stone and determined this carving could not have been done using another stone or simple metal tool. The question remains then, how did they carve it? This artifact from Patagonia shows signs and letters from the Semitic alphabet. Is this Sylvie's late grandfather, she jokingly asks. It certainly looks like him, she states. So here we not only have a swastika, but we also have a person who sits like a Buddha or in some type of yoga position. This is a very interesting parallel of writings from the Indus Valley of Pakistan and Afghanistan, and those of the tribes located on Easter Island, some thousands of miles away over the Pacific Ocean. The background writing is from Easter Island, and to the front is the Indus Valley writing. If you remember the Michigan artifacts, they were centered around a mining community. They harvested copper, large chunks of the metal. This is an example of a large piece found, which weighs around 3 tons. So many artifacts were found that they had to build a museum just to house them all. Archaeologists were used, and they had to come up with some type of explanation to explain the multitude of artifacts. So they said all the artifacts were made by hunter-gatherers who didn't even have homes or any sign of farming capabilities. Yet, these people who didn't have any ceramics were manufacturing in industrial quantities these advanced weapons and tools in the European style. These wild people didn't have forks or plates or anything, she states, yet they could melt and pour metal and shape it into sophisticated tools. What on earth did they pour the metal into if they didn't even have a bowl? Banana leaves, she asks. Even many mainstream historians, she continues, openly admit these stories associated with the dating procedure and placing these items in distant dates are ridiculous. But still, this remains the official version of history, even though it is quickly losing faith. In this video, J.S. Wakefield describes in his lecture Europeans that came over to America to mine copper at Poverty Point in Michigan, where the artifacts were found. Another interesting item to follow is the work of Jim Vreera and Fritz Zimmermann about the enormous megalithic mounds found all over the Americas, and there are thousands, which have been pretty much ignored in American history. The reason she believes for ignoring full cultures even after they have discovered tons of artifacts supporting their existence is that they belong to the people that survived from the older advanced civilizations. These people, she believes, had the capability to travel from continent to continent, but the modern parasitic paradigm continues to try and trick the people into thinking that the only way to have advanced technology and civilizations is to comply with their ideas and their parasitic way of life, of pollution, war, lies, and violence. All traces of advanced civilization who could travel between continents have been ignored as much as possible, she states. Here we see a blonde boy amongst the Maori people of New Zealand. This photo shows something which normally doesn't happen in their people. Though this may reflect a throwback gene from another race of people, possibly from Atlantis, she believes, or even Europe. There was a tribe in Dakota called the Madan Indians, who have sadly been wiped out. Travellers in the area who saw them described them as having light hair and blue eyes. So there were tribes of all races. The multiracial tribal situation doesn't at all suit the current modern history taught to us. Which is why current methods try to distract us from the truth. If you start talking about the Caucasian people in the Americas, it's usually followed by loud screams from those who think the history of the Caucasians of the land may rob somehow the Native Americans from their history, she believes. In reality, it is the history fabricators who are disrespecting the history that the Native Americans keep about their white brothers. The fabricators are working hard to erase the memory of everyone from the time when the natives and the Caucasians were friends. The parasites have driven the native tribes into reservations and have stolen their land. On the other hand, they were trying to convert all Caucasians into their parasitic paradigm and to scam them into believing that the only path for progress is to plunder the countries and the people of other nations and then bomb them into death and destruction. Yet at the same time, she believes we foolishly cut the very branch we stand on by poisoning the planet we are all part of. The only way to put amends to this suicidal path we are on is to retrace our steps back to the way as shown to us by the survivors of Atlantis. When they arrived in America, they taught their ways to the locals. They didn't kill and plunder them. The genes of the survivor culture can be found even in Peru, Sylvie believes, such as those displayed in the girl with blonde hair. These are some of the more blue-eyed Peruvian gods. Again, the colour of the hair of the mummies corresponds with the colour of the statues found in this culture, such as those of the blonde-haired statue and blonde beards. The Atlantean style of headband seen in these pictures is a common fashion piece throughout the native culture of the Americas. Pizarro wrote about his experiences within the Incan culture in Peru. In his papers, he reported meeting with white people ruling over the culture and places. As usual, Sylvie states the original writings have disappeared, and only copies have been made public. But even after going through parasitic editions here and there, you can find some useful information. He also reported buildings used like a type of hotel in various locations. The question arises, of course, who can build a hotel finished to a fine level of detail which would impress a Spanish gentleman of that time? Some other sources quote, "He found over 500 Inca gods living amongst the people, displaying blonde hair and blue eyes." As we will see later, in all the books written at that time, when America was supposedly discovered for the first time, were not to the taste of the history fabricators. This is why the originals were seized and quarantined or destroyed, and we can only, if we're lucky, source copies of these books which can be made available. This is an old painting of a fair-skinned Inca ruler. Everybody and everything was there in America. Giants, dwarfs, even possibly aliens. Brian Forrester, Sylvie suggests, is publishing a wonderful work on the subject. This man is being given an injection for some reason or another and towers above the white Caucasian. Dwarves have also been mentioned in the jungles of America, and Sylvie was told a story about a researcher who had his own experiences with these beings, but she has no idea if they are actually still alive. It is unfortunate that tribes have been completely decimated due to their fellow man. Sylvie tells of her experiences in Peru when she spoke with a soldier who was sent into the jungle to clear an area. He claimed he simply followed orders, and this, of course, she learned, was the murder of all the tribespeople within that particular area. It seems in North America, she believes, the powers that be have cleared almost everything they needed to clear. However, such tasks are still ongoing in Africa. The information is so scarce that we don't even know to the extent of how much is going on, as our attention is drawn toward the Middle East, where it is also happening there to the peaceful citizens, she believed. Though it seems the people being killed at the moment are being killed in greater numbers in Africa. Going back to Peru, this is a newborn baby with an elongated skull. This goes against all the claims of boarding to change the skulls. It seems in certain cases they were born this way. Here in this video, there are more additional resources on this topic. These old photos are of Native Americans. These people clearly don't have the characteristics of the Native American race, Sylvie believes, stating, "This is absolutely natural, considering the amount of artifacts discovered in America from all over the world. All these races came with their artifacts and mixed with the natives, creating quite an international people, similar to the modern America and Europe of today." This picture shows people of the Seminole tribe in their traditional clothing. They look like they came straight from Europe, Sylvie suggests. The symbol of the double-headed eagle is a lasting symbol, she believes, of the empire of the survivors, and something we will be coming back to in later episodes. This interesting archaeological site found in Brazil, Sylvie explains, displays large stones built within a wall which is some 30 to 40 meters, and some are 40 meters long. She doesn't even know if this is from the survivor period or from even a period before the establishment of the great empire. For instance, this inscription is found in that region of Brazil, but due to the size of this region in the world, it's impossible to know if it came from that area of the huge walls. She finds the Paraíba walls interesting. It's a tourist attraction where tourists are taken on a regular basis. But mysteriously, tours are designed to take folks around the area but not to the wall itself. The walls of Paribas, she claims, are also similar to the area around the equally mysterious Inca stone. The stone is declared a total mystery, as they cannot find a civilization responsible for making it, and its language is not known. But not only that, they cannot understand the method used to make the carvings, as it would suggest the rock was melted rather than chiseled out. The most suspicious thing about the Inca area, including the Paribas wall, are the regular round marks found on other stones. Sylvia asks if it were possible something was hitting the stone with enough force to melt it. She suggests this type of damage could reveal a lot about our lost history, as they are found in other sites around the planet, and always on sites that don't fit the narration of the fairy tales that is our history. They can be found in Africa, in Bulgaria for instance, in the elf castles where geologists don't believe these have been made naturally. In previous videos, Sylvia has already shown samples with round marks. It is strange, she points out, that these are found near the cities and not in the wilderness. The most likely reason, she believes, was by using some sort of Sodom and Gomorrah style weapon to destroy the remains of the older civilizations. William Niven discovered an entirely new culture in Central America. Not in the jungles where it's hard to study, but outside Mexico City. It had its own pictographs and had massive walls, as you can see, compared to the person on the left. It was a relatively advanced culture, and they collected over 40,000 artifacts, big enough to open a museum, she speculated. The dig site, however, was shut down and the artifacts disappeared. It seems, she states, this culture was not old or primitive enough. It didn't comply with the fairy tale history we have all been readily told. All we have are photos of possibly 10 items out of the thousands. We see pictures of beads and pots, which don't in themselves contradict the official history. But as she asks, if all the items didn't contradict the official history accounts, why can't we see those as well? Moving on to the deception of elephants in the pre-Columbian era, it's very uncomfortable for mainstream historians who believe the elephants were there, but that was some 10 to 12,000 years ago. The elephant depictions and statues are so numerous that they can't do the usual procedures as they have done with other artifacts, because the carvings are there on the walls of so many pre-Columbian cities. So instead, they squirm and say it's a mystery. As Sylvie states, people buy it. This artifact, for example, belongs to the Tehuanacan culture. And this is from the Michigan collections. And this is from Peru. The Mayans even used the elephants in their writings, she believes. It's not just the elephants. The stories about the bananas are no different. The proof about the pre-Columbian bananas comes from excavations and studies into linguistics, she claims, and also points out that there are many other animals and fruits that appeared that should not have been there in history. This is a very interesting group of artifacts from Mexico. Allegedly ancient Mayan. Some have a difficulty accepting them as ancient because the depiction of UFO craft matches exactly those we possess today of aliens. But this does not mean that they are not real. Klaus Donner, an Austrian researcher, has done tests on the artifacts, so they could be genuine, she speculates. This is an ancestor of the elephants, but not the elephants we know today. This prehistoric animal has been excavated in other parts of the world, which we were told went extinct around 20 million years ago. Sylvie asks, then how on earth did those alleged primitive cultures in the Americas know about these animals? Unless they had some type of time machine and went back in time to view the animals, or maybe the time has come for us to stop believing the lies, which we call history. The famous Olmec heads depict people with alleged African appearance. And they're also seen depicted on the murals. And she suggests the native cultures had a naturally dark complexion. But they went further, using darker pigmentation to denote the darker skin tones than others, she suggests. Aztecs are nearly, if not completely, wiped out. But this is a picture which shows how some of them used to look. Not only Africans, but other nations were freely travelling, even from China. Sylvie met this girl in the Amazon rainforest. The Shapiri people, whom she spent a year and a half with, were Asian in appearance, she claims. Recently a new ancient city was found in Honduras and is called Copan. Interestingly enough, here we see the monkey deity in India called Hanuman. It seems this Honduran monkey king carries a type of club or lantern, a similarity also shared with the Indian deity. It's not just the artifacts that prove the Americas were well connected in pre-Columbian times. It is written and verbally held, such as the Popol Vuh, the historic book of the Mayan Quichua people of Guatemala, describes in this manner the visitors from across the Atlantic Ocean who used to be in touch with the locals. It seems they came in great numbers. They lived together. Some were white, some black. Many were different classes. It was amazing to simply listen to their speech, but it was the same. Some of the text suggests there were many languages, whilst in others it suggests it was the same. Sylvie speculates possibly the languages were the same, but the written language was different, however. A traveller called James Churchworth observed that some Japanese and certain American tribes can understand each other without any need for a translator. The anthologist Carlos Villanova observed a tribe from India called the Nagas, who used a language similar to that used by the Yucatan Mayan. But Sylvie asks, surely all languages had a series of components which are similar. However, the similarity observed was nearly 90%, which is truly remarkable. By now, Sylvie claims we should see that the history told to us in schools is utter nonsense. Other examples along these discoveries can be found in this book as well. On Brighton Beach in New York, you will find breaker stones to assist against sea erosion. However, the stones used appear to be some sort of ruin. Are these stones, she asks, from some sort of historic site we are not supposed to know about? By now, she speculates, you are wondering how this current history came to be administered about the Americas, she asks. It's not based around the idea the native people had themselves about the history. Instead, it's based on actual artifacts which does not match those told of us in the schools. The official history of the Americas was composed. It's a story, written by characters such as one Diego de Lando, a bloodthirsty murderer who destroyed countless artifacts of the culture and history of the native peoples. Burning the artifacts and even the natives themselves before sitting down and rewriting the history of the Americas. His writings are now taken as pure and indisputable truth, and very often quoted as an authentic source of American history. It's his books that are the main cornerstones of the modern, current history of the Americas. In the 17th century, the main forces of the Reformation reached the Americas in all its force. Its military-style action was vicious and cruel, she suggests, which changed the paradigm of history and eradication of the peaceful existence. It was mistaken and misrepresented as a movement which didn't like church bells and the translation of the Bible into German. Rather, it was an event that nearly wiped out vast populations within Europe. Those same forces arrived in the Americas with the intention of having their new parasitic history accepted, no matter the cost to human life. No wonder their prime targets were the old books, the keepers of oral traditions and artifacts. Their jobs was much easier in America, and they wiped out hundreds of thousands. The fabrication of the history was in the hands of a few chosen people, and they were told what to write and what not to write. There were already Caucasian people living in America long before Columbus, she states. So it wasn't the European people that caused this, but rather the parasitic Reformation process and the hidden hand which guided movements and caused the massive loss of life. If you listen to this is how the Reformation history fabricators described their fellow man, namely the murderers who arrived on the shores of the Americas. The men who arrived were very peaceful, God-fearing and compassionate fellows. But all the problems occurred because of those strange Native Americans, who for some unknown reason were trying to fight them. Sylvie suggests, how would we have reacted if people came and started stealing our lands, killing us and burning our history? She said it's no wonder the natives fought back. But sadly, this is how it was represented by the so-called historians of the Reformation. When they ran out of patience, they started killing the natives. As Sylvie points out, not all the tribes were killed following the Reformation. She points out many were given blankets to keep them warm. However, those blankets were infected with smallpox, which killed many more. The US was formed in 1776. And that is right after the last pieces of the survivors were swallowed by the newly formed countries within Russia and Europe. She explains this will be covered in later episodes. Before 1776, the complete Americas were the official territory of the European Empire. After a few decades, the people who were living witness to all these changes died, and the history was twisted, and they wrote the stories about the US getting its independence from England. No, they didn't, she claimed. But exactly the opposite is true. It is at this point in history that England could start influencing the Americas, and that is the case still today. The governments of the US and England are still both intrinsically entwined by the same families, ruling in the background, which effectively rules the world from policies made within their governments, she states. In future episodes, Sylvie will be showing you evidence of the empire of the survivors and how it existed and was defeated. And all this, she claims, will make much, much more sense. As far as the newly formed Americas initially, it was inhabited by people who were living in the paradigm of the righteous and the respectful. Okay, they were defeated, but it didn't erase their morals straight away. And that is why the Constitution of the United States was written in such a way that respected human rights. But later on, the powers that be, who initially employed the murderers from the Reformation, slowly but surely they poisoned the minds of the people through mass media, and gradually, as they lost touch with their higher selves, they could swallow up more and more insane governmental rules and regulations which took away their basic human rights. The modern fabricated history we are taught in schools, called Scaligerian, was the backbone written by Joseph Scaliger during the Reformation period. So to make it look like something we would buy, historians, according to Sylvie, added quotes from Popov, as this was a traditional Mayan book, which were taken out of context but matched their phantom history. Actually, the book contains numerous references of connections with people from the other side of the ocean, and even connections from the Catholic Church. So how can they get away with ignoring such things, Sylvie suggested? They simply don't tell these details, and secondly, even if some specialists find such references to such things, they claim it was added later, as it doesn't fit the modern history as we know it, so they determine it had to have been added later. There is no other reason for this, she believed. So this is how they did it, she claims, with deceit and cheap tricks. Another frequently quoted source of the fabricators is taken from Verdadera de la Condesa de la Nueva España, written by a member of the crew of the Cortez. And it details first-hand accounts written by Bernal Diaz. They are often quoted as to the validity of the Skelliger history. Firstly, although it has been claimed Europe was brewing with excitement about the discovery of America, it took them over 100 years, according to the Skelliger history, to finally print the book which detailed the find. Sylvie asks, why did it take so long for the people to know? Another question that arises, where is the original? What was printed contained many corrections, so what does this mean, she asks. The book seems to be written by a professional writer, a person with lots of experience with writing books, and not like those taken from a ship crew member. Las Cansa was another Spanish priest who wrote about the observations during the time of Cortes, and is often quoted as a source by the Skelliger supporters. So what about this original book? Sylvie asks. His work was published 400 years after the accounts were written, yet the society in Europe were keen to know what was in America. The main body of his work was quarantined in Spanish archives and was banned from study for over 400 years, while other works of his, which didn't contradict the Skelliger timeline, were allowed to remain in circulation, but the originals remained hidden or were destroyed. Other written accounts are often quoted as reliable sources because they were first-hand witnesses to the events, but they don't mention the minute detail that they were born over 100 years after the Reformation and the conquest of America. Yet they are called witnesses. They didn't see the events, but heard or read about them later. The same tactic is still present in our media today. Even though we live every day with aspects of war in our media, the exchanges of information can be radically different depending on where and which side you find yourself within the war. So regardless as to who is right or wrong, there are a group of people who don't have the proper information, and this is presently happening today. So if it happens today, you can only imagine, Sylvie states, it is much easier to manipulate the history from hundreds, if not thousands of years ago. This is the Chaco culture from New Mexico. The architectural style is strongly reminiscent of that of the Old World, she speculates. And so are the buildings of the Anasazi culture found in Utah, and also the Chukch-Ipwa culture, who had red-haired natives, some of which we saw earlier. Teotihuacan is a very famous tourist attraction, but 99% of what the tourist knows is taken from the fantasies of the historians and restoration teams, Sylvie claims. These specialists must have thought that it looked like that and repaired it in that fashion. These are parts of the complex which are still intact and are still in their original condition. But these are found underground and no one can study them. Our attention is rather distracted by the claims that various platforms are associated with particular stars. And it is a very interesting way to distract us, Sylvie claims, because there are countless platforms and countless stars, stating you could draw lines between many stars over the course of a lifetime and you still would have many more left undone. These images are from lesser known areas around the site, where the original stones have been forgotten. Or maybe they forgot to hide them from the tourists. But what we see are regularly cut stones with possibly a high energized tool, or even the rock melted and cast. In addition, the builders, we're assured, lived in this type of housing. Then how, in the preserved past of the Teotihuacan, can we see an entirely different picture? We find platforms and even entire squares covered in a thick layer of cement. Even in the walls and floors we find the same cement layers, she states. From original accounts when the city was first discovered, it even mentioned that the roofs above the beams of the houses would have had a thick layer of cement. So why, according to the official history, did hut dwellers build the city, she asks. According to the official records, it seems it is quite the opposite. Those who have been researching on site are telling different things. Margel Covarrubias claims mysterious foreign elite whose motherland was situated somewhere in the east. This famous Mexican ethnologist went on to say, having mastered the more primitive local tribes, the strangers stood at the top of the new civilized culture, formed on the basis of the cultural fusion of the two cultural streams, local and foreign. This makes sense, Sylvie suggests, in that the rough primitive work belongs to the locals, whilst the sophisticated stonework would belong to the foreign culture. So actually, many historians are doing their work, but it's not being included in the school books. The Swiss explorer Sigvald Lenny, who for many years conducted research into the area of the city, said the local population was driven out from the valley by some unknown foreign people who built the city in its splendour, and he refuses to acknowledge even the possibility of fusion of both cultures. Many anthropologists are spotting the obvious parallel between the Asian and the American arts. They could not have developed independently. They were all intertwined, Sylvie suggests. If you wish to explore the history behind this, you should consider checking out the works of Paul Ravit, Jose Embeleone, Carl Ginze, and Leonard Adams. An interesting Mayan archaeological site in Mexico is called Espalenque. Within its famous temple of inscriptions are a couple of images which are found, and some would suggest, according to Sylvie, represent astronauts using sophisticated technical equipment, or at least that's the way people would choose to interpret it that way.